say, since the major part of the CO2 emissions in the U.S. and also in China, which is a big emitter, is due to burning fossil fuels for electrical power generation, what strategies could be adopted to push the economy, enough solar voltaic and solar thermal to the point where economy of scale makes it competitive economically with fossil fuels?
So, is this on?
Yeah, it has to be a green light, yeah.
Oh, okay, I see it. Earlier this week, US EPA announced that there had been, between the year 2010 and 2012, a 10% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. I'm going to repeat that. In 2 years, there had been a 10% reduction in greenhouse gases from power plants. This is due, in some measure, to renewables, but in a much larger measure to natural gas displacing coal. Now, my view is that in California, we need to push as hard as hell, as Fran pointed out, that Senator Pavley, she was talking about how we're going to 33% renewables by the year 2020. What we need to push for is to get to 51% by the year 2030. That should be our new mantra and our new goal, 51 by 30. And if we do that, we are going to have a tremendous new investment opportunity in California for even increasing the amount of renewables. Here in Los Angeles, the Department of Water and Power had relied heavily on coal. The department is now committed, thanks to a lot of great activism by Sierra Club. Jim Stewart, where are you? This man can take credit for a great deal of that excellent work that was done. And so there is a commitment to converting off of coal to go towards energy efficiency, to renewables, and as a last resort, there are times that those need to be filled by some natural gas. But again, the goal is to increase the amount of renewables. Right now, renewables are more expensive. But as Senator Pavley pointed out, and this is something we have to keep in mind all the time, what's the cost of not converting to renewables? And we need to keep that cost-benefit analysis. If we don't affect this conversion away from fossil fuel for energy generation as quickly as possible, it is expensive, and guess what? It's tough too. It's not easy. But I think we're up to that fight, and we have to make that happen.
Can I follow up on that real quick? You talked about roofs. 20% of Los Angeles is roofs.
That's right. Yeah.
That sounds like a hell of a lot of solar panels.
Yeah.
Instead of going out in the desert, for instance, and destroying the desert and building solar arrays there where we have to transport electricity into the city and lose 30% of it, why aren't we putting the solar panels on the roofs? And by the way, I'm going to disagree with you just a little bit. I don't think it's, as a homeowner, I don't think it would be painful for me to put solar panels on my roof when I know in 10 to 15 years I'm going to have all of that money back by the savings and energy and get free energy after that. What do you think of that?
So, I'm not an expert in the physics of the energy grid.
Oh, by the way, is Paul Scott still here?
He just walked.
I saw him earlier, and I was thinking about him when you asked the question.
But one of the problems that I hear from the engineers within the utilities is the difficulty of integrating all of the distributed generation into the grid. And that's why I was pushing for the concept of a microgrid and modernizing our grid. Because right now in Hawaii, they have maxed out on photovoltaics going into their grid. They can't take any more. They're done on Oahu. They can't do any more. And that's because they have an antiquated grid. And here in California, a lot of the utility guys are saying we need to have our distribution stations and our receiving stations converted so that we can do energy storage at these sites so we could balance out the grid. That is more expensive though, and I'm just saying that for us to do it, I don't want to minimize that there aren't some costs. So for example, snapshot of today, to put PV on a roof is somewhere in the range, if you have a really big roof and a great deal, you can maybe get it for 14 or 15 cents per kilowatt hour. It goes up to about 28 cents per kilowatt hour. To generate wind in the hills above the Tehachapi's is at around 8 cents per kilowatt hour. Snapshot of today, the amount we're paying in the city of LA to bring in Palo Verde nuke energy, I'm not in favor of it, I'm just telling you the price, is 3 cents per kilowatt hour. So there are some additional costs associated with renewable generation, but it's an important, necessary cost. I just want to say that so that when we go and argue with people that don't want renewables, we don't sound naive. And the price is coming down considerably on the solar, but will it come down to the cost of traditional coal and natural gas fire plants from a rooftop? Maybe not, but from a large-scale solar facility, it'll be competitive within the next few years.
I have a Santa Monica question based on Jonathan's comments about activism in Los Angeles. Fran Pavley was very gracious in acknowledging Santa Monica's role in pioneering sustainability policy. How can we in Santa Monica become a net exporter of climate change action? We have things to offer. Santa Monica has a sustainable city plan. We have divested from all of our fossil fuel stocks in our portfolio. We passed a sustainability rights ordinance. And when I talk to my colleagues on city councils in other cities, they say, sure, you can do that. You're Santa Monica. You have these people here as your constituents. I think like Bill's diagram of the infrared heating the greenhouse gases, we have to turn up the heat from below. We have to get the grassroots on fire about this to move the political decision makers. How can we do that?
I love that metaphor. Well, let me throw a new thing out for you, which I think is a new concept and one that is exportable from Santa Monica to other cities. If Santa Monica is climate ready, that becomes something that one can actually sell as an economic virtue. That no matter what hits us, we're ready. We can deal with it. Our supply chain, good. Our water supply, we're good. Electricity, we're good. When it comes to sea level rise and big storms, we're ready. If Santa Monica still has some work to do on this, but if Santa Monica on the adaptation side of the ledger works on these matters and becomes a climate resilient city and shows that there are economic benefits, because then you can have companies moving into Santa Monica that says, no matter what, we know the electricity is going to be running. No matter what, you have a microgrid, we know that we're going to be good. We're never going to have any downtime. I think you can start selling being climate ready as a virtue, and it makes a strong economic argument that would work in Texas or Louisiana.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is the problem with politics today, as you guys know more than anyone, is that our thought process is so short-sighted. It may be cheaper to do something in the short run. Those cheap light bulbs were an example. But in the long run, it costs you more money. And so how can we get people back to that fundamental way of thinking about life is what really makes you happy in the long run, is thinking in the long run, planning in the long run, making a better future. And that's really what we're talking about here, and I think what you guys have been trying to do in the city council as well, that a lot of other folks don't get.
Also, Santa Monica is part of networks that go out across the world. So the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, Santa Monica has been one of the leaders. What happens in Santa Monica, it's not like Las Vegas, it actually just doesn't stay in Santa Monica. You guys are seen as the leaders throughout the globe, and your influence is felt. Now, but is it felt in Fort Worth? Maybe not. But the concept of becoming climate ready and resilient as a challenge to other cities, that, in my view, is what you can activate even more conservative constituencies out across America that could excite them, and then they would have to follow suit. Because then it becomes a competition for capital. And I think that if Santa Monica could show that it is a competitor in that regard, it could really stir things up.
Good afternoon. My name is Parker Jean. I'm a proud student of Professor Selby. So this one would be directed at Jonathan, although if you would like to comment on it too, Professor, even though I waste up too many of your office hours anyway. But so first of all, and I wish Fran Pavley was still here because I really would like to have her state legislator opinion. The first comment would be SB4, now that we're this ongoing debate about fracking, it almost seems counterintuitive because we have this big time limit in terms of climate change, and something like SB4 really it sends a kind of a message that it's still okay, as opposed to the moratorium. So if you could really just comment on that in terms of the long-term perspective, and one more solution that I feel would be decent in the short term would be an oil severance tax, considering that California is the only state that doesn't have an oil severance, or large producing oil state that doesn't have an oil severance tax.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was a question there. Again, I have to be very clear. Our theory of change is making climate impacts relevant for people's lives. That's where I'm starting. There are some excellent groups working on the fracking question. I encourage you to be in touch with them. But we are laser focused on talking about how people's lives are being impacted by climate effects and how they can protect themselves. So I'm looking at that middle 30 to 40% and how to make them care about this issue right now. I don't know if fracking moves the middle 30 to 40%, candidly. I don't know.
Yeah, just to comment on that too, you all understand that these new technologies have really changed the economic game here. Because when we used to study this 4 or 5 years ago, we could show that this was going to be an economic cliff for this country. We were going to go over that cliff if we didn't change to renewables as quickly as possible. But now with this new technology, and the price of oil is high enough now that it supports it, we do have a lot more opportunities to get fossil fuels that we never did before, and we're going to burn those fossil fuels. China's going to burn them. India's going to burn them. So it makes it, I think, even more important to talk about those externalities that you're trying to say is that this is going to cost us more in the long run if we don't do something right now. That's
exactly right. In my view, we have to make the case that we have to leave that stuff in the ground. We have not made that case. We haven't made the case. And so we're fighting on a solution where we haven't brought the rest of the American public along on the context of why it's so essential to fight it.
Hi, my name's Ryan Duncans. I'm gonna stand up. I am a student of Selby's as well, and I also went to this preschool that's right next door to here a long time ago. Well, not that long ago, I guess, but it seems like a long time ago to me. Oh, sorry. I went to this preschool right here, that's what I was saying, and I graduated on this stage. And so it's cool to see that this place has transformed into this, and like kind of brought me full circle. But I just want to speak on soil. So I've heard a lot about water conservation and the cool streets and stuff like that, and trying to eliminate or lessen the effects of the concrete and the heating of cities and stuff like that. So I just want to ask, how practical is it to start enforcing like city composting and gardening in local parks? And I know there's like community gardens and stuff like that, but how do we make it more open to the public, and more like continuous thing that's actually like feeding the public and feeding farmers markets and stuff like that? And that's to you, John.
Thank you, Ryan. You know, I went to Samuel High myself, so I'm a local. Yeah. Probably many years before most of you, but yeah. I love composting, and I love the food recycling and the harvesting of sewage and turning it into biomethane, and that's already happening. We're doing a lot of that already in Los Angeles. We can do more of that. And the reality, though, is that those are not, my key issues, and I think those are great issues. But when it comes to climate change, we're really focusing on how to help people survive. Now, food security is a huge issue, and when we look at so let's say something happens to the levees in the California Delta, and we lose over 70% of the water that comes into Southern California through the California aqueduct. Our food coming from the Central Valley would be in great jeopardy right at that point. And then how do we feed the 10 million people of Los Angeles County? Now, that's an important question. And that kind of resiliency is something that we need to look at. And one of the reasons why one of our climate sort of no regrets strategies is to do more water recycling and to do more conservation. The fact that we have these grass lawns that are kind of like reminiscent of Versailles, so yes, we all have our little Versailles in front of our house, that day really has to end. We have to recognize that we are in a Mediterranean climate. We are not in another kind of a rainier, more verdant climate. We have to live within our means. And we should be able to save water from outdoor use, which is about 40% of all the water that's in Southern California is for outdoor use. We have to find ways to use that much more conservatively. And so I think that, for me, the food security question is incredibly important when it comes to climate resiliency, and we have to somehow find ways of using less water for things that simply aren't needed.
Okay. I'm going to bring up Catherine King and Chris Gutierrez to give some final comments.
I just
Bill would like
want to say
respond.
one more thing. I left a handout for everyone that summarizes the latest climate science, and I hope that helps a little bit. It covers some of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about today. And in regards to the last couple of questions, just, we can't do everything. We are all wasteful in so many ways. I am too. And do what you can. The little things here and there all of those things collectively are going to make a huge difference. And and that includes all of us. Thank you.